84-year-old Nancy Guthrie, and we have a break in the case. The FBI has just released a surveillance photo showing a, quote, subject in the case. Take a look at your screen. We'll put them up. You can see what appears to be a male figure armed, carrying a backpack.
Something shocking just surfaced in a case that has puzzled a quiet community. The FBI interrogation of Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law just leaked, and it is leaving questions no one can ignore. Secrets may be coming to light, but what really happened that night remains unclear. The tension is high, and the answers are not straightforward. Every small clue seems to point in unexpected directions. Who can be trusted when family is involved? What hidden truths are still waiting to be discovered? Join us as we dig into this mystery and uncover what's really happening behind the scenes. The disappearance that shocked a quiet community. Nancy Guthrie was known in her community as a calm and caring grandmother who valued family above everything else. At 84 years old, she still lived independently and worked hard to keep her daily life organized. Her routine rarely changed. She spoke with her daughters often, kept family photographs neatly arranged in her home, and followed the same weekly schedule for meals, errands, and phone calls. People close to her described her as careful and structured. Even small changes in her routine were unusual. Nancy had children who were already grown with families of their own. Each of them was married and had built stable homes. Family gatherings were common, especially for dinner and holidays. These gatherings were important to her because they helped her stay connected to memories and traditions. She remembered birthdays, anniversaries, and small personal details about each grandchild. Her attachment to family history made her home feel warm and familiar. On the evening she disappeared, everything seemed normal. Nancy had dinner with family members, and there were no signs of conflict or concern. The meal followed the same relaxed pattern that had happened many times before. After dinner, it was reported that her son-in-law drove her home. This was not unusual because family members often helped her with transportation at night. Nothing about that evening suggested danger. No one reported any argument or strange behavior. Her daughters later explained that Nancy appeared calm and comfortable before leaving. Because of her predictable lifestyle, there was no reason to expect anything unusual would happen after she returned home. The next morning, however, the situation changed quickly. Nancy could not be reached by phone, calls went unanswered, and her device appeared inactive. This immediately worried her family because she normally responded quickly. Her daughters tried several times to contact her, but there was still no response. Family members then checked her home. The house did not show any obvious signs of forced entry. Doors and windows appeared normal. Nothing looked disturbed at first glance. This made the situation more confusing because it did not match a typical break-in scenario. Local law enforcement was contacted, and an early investigation began. Officers understood that cases involving elderly individuals require urgent attention. People at advanced ages may depend on medication, regular meals, and safe environmental conditions. Even short periods without assistance can create serious health risks. Because of this, investigators moved quickly to begin standard missing person procedures. One of the first steps involved tracking phone activity. Investigators worked to determine the last recorded signal from Nancy's device. At the same time, they began reviewing financial activity to see whether any recent transactions had occurred. This helps investigators understand whether a missing person may have traveled voluntarily or whether something unexpected happened. Officers also began interviewing close relatives and neighbors. These interviews focused on daily routines, recent conversations, and any possible unusual events. Family members publicly showed concern and presented a united front during the early days of the search. They cooperated with investigators and shared information about Nancy's habits and health. As part of timeline reconstruction, investigators also reviewed purchase records connected to people involved in Nancy's final known movements. Reports later mentioned that clothing connected to the suspect may have been purchased at Walmart. This detail was not treated as direct evidence, but as a supporting element in understanding the sequence of events. As the timeline became clearer, One detail repeatedly brought investigators back to the same person. It was the individual who said he had simply driven her home that evening. And that detail would soon change the direction of the entire investigation. Why suspicion shifted toward family. During the early stages of the investigation, detectives focused on building a clear and reliable timeline. Establishing the final confirmed movements of a missing person is one of the most important steps in any case. Investigators began by confirming the dinner gathering where Nancy had last been seen. Family members agreed on the general sequence of events, including the time she arrived and the time she left. The final confirmed sighting placed Nancy with her son-in-law. According to statements, he drove her home after the family meal. Because this was the last known moment she was seen by others, investigators needed to understand every detail connected to that trip. In missing person cases, family members are usually interviewed first. This is not because investigators assume guilt. Instead, relatives typically have the most access, the most knowledge of routines, and the greatest opportunity to observe daily behavior. Family members often provide the strongest starting point for building an accurate timeline. Detectives conducted structured interviews to compare details from each person. They reviewed driving routes, estimated travel times, and any stops that may have occurred along the way. Investigators also asked about recent conversations and emotional changes. Even small variations can become important later. As interviews continued, digital evidence began playing a larger role. Modern investigations rely heavily on technology to confirm or challenge verbal statements. Detectives reviewed phone activity connected to people involved in the timeline. This included location signals, message activity, and communication patterns. Location data helps investigators determine whether devices were moving or stationary during key periods. Communication records help confirm who contacted whom and when those interactions occurred. These digital markers often provide objective timestamps that help investigators organize events more accurately. As more data was reviewed, small inconsistencies began appearing between statements and digital records. These inconsistencies were not dramatic at first, but they were noticeable enough to require deeper analysis. Investigators continued gathering information without making public conclusions. Media coverage soon began discussing the case. One of the commentators who later spoke about the investigation was Ashley Banfield. Public discussion increased attention on the timeline and on the importance of digital evidence in modern cases. However, investigators remained focused on verified facts rather than speculation. Investigators were not ready to make an arrest, but they were already preparing something far more strategic. The morning everything changed, the interrogation begins. The direction of the investigation shifted early one morning when investigators carried out a planned operation connected to Nancy's disappearance. By this time, detectives had already reviewed interviews, phone activity, and timeline details. Several questions still needed clear answers, and investigators decided that a controlled interview would help clarify the remaining gaps. Law enforcement officers arrived quietly and followed standard procedures. Their goal was not to create public attention, but to gather accurate information. The son-in-law was brought in for questioning. This step was part of the investigation process and did not immediately mean guilt. In many cases, individuals connected to the final timeline are interviewed again when new details appear. The interview took place inside a federal interview room. The environment was neutral and carefully controlled. The room contained simple furniture, soft lighting, and recording equipment. Cameras were already set up to document the full conversation. Recording interviews helps ensure accuracy and allows investigators to review statements later. The interview began early in the morning. The timing was intentional. Investigators often choose morning interviews because people are more likely to speak naturally when they are still adjusting to the day. This method can help reduce rehearsed responses and allow investigators to observe natural behavior patterns. Investigators carefully observed his reaction during this moment. His initial behavior appeared cooperative and calm. He answered early questions without hesitation. His tone remained steady, and he seemed prepared to explain his version of events. Investigators noticed that his timeline sounded structured and organized. This suggested that he had already reviewed the sequence of events in his mind. The interview moved step by step through the evening Nancy disappeared. He described the family dinner in detail. He explained the order of events and confirmed who attended. The information generally matched earlier statements provided during the first stage of the investigation. Next, he explained the drive to Nancy's home. He described the route and estimated travel time. According to his explanation, the trip was normal and without any problems. He stated that he helped ensure she entered her home safely before leaving the area. Investigators allowed him to describe these events carefully. They did not interrupt or challenge details at this stage. This approach is part of a common interrogation strategy. Trained investigators often allow individuals to repeat their timeline multiple times. The purpose is to lock statements into the official record before introducing conflicting evidence. Allowing repetition also helps investigators observe consistency. When someone repeats the same event, small changes can appear naturally. These changes can later help investigators understand whether a timeline is based on clear memory or structured preparation. The suspect continued speaking confidently. His explanations remained steady, and his posture suggested comfort. Investigators maintained the same calm tone and continued asking open questions. The goal was to gather as much detail as possible without revealing what evidence had already been collected. For more than an hour, the conversation remained smooth. The timeline sounded consistent. No strong contradictions had been introduced yet. The suspect appeared certain that his explanation answered the investigators' concerns. However, the investigators were not finished. They had already prepared additional material for the next stage of the interview. This material included digital evidence connected to the timeline they had been carefully reconstructing. After reviewing the final part of his explanation, one of the agents reached toward a laptop positioned on the table. Within seconds, the tone inside the room began to shift. For over an hour, everything had sounded consistent. Then investigators pressed play on a piece of evidence that immediately changed the direction of the conversation. The evidence builds: phone calls, messages, and digital trails. Once the initial timeline had been fully recorded, investigators moved to the next stage of the interview. This stage focused on digital evidence. Modern investigations often depend heavily on electronic records because these records provide objective time markers. Unlike spoken memory, digital data usually includes exact timestamps and stored activity patterns. Investigators introduced recorded communication connected to the case. The audio was part of the broader timeline they had already assembled. At first, the suspect appeared curious rather than concerned. His posture remained steady, and he listened closely. Within a short period, however, investigators observed a clear change in body language. His responses became slower. He began shifting in his seat and adjusting his posture more often. These physical changes are important because investigators are trained to observe behavior as well as spoken answers. As the audio continued, investigators replayed specific sections to confirm details. This is a common method used to test consistency. Replaying sections allows investigators to compare explanations across multiple responses. Digital forensic analysis had already confirmed key technical elements connected to the communication records. One of these methods is call tracing. Call tracing helps identify which device was used during a conversation. This process includes device identification numbers, network routing information, and timestamp verification. Carrier records also play a major role. Mobile network providers store call activity logs that include time, duration, and connection points. These logs help investigators confirm whether communication occurred exactly when claimed. Another important technique is device extraction. Digital forensic specialists can retrieve stored information directly from a device. This includes deleted messages, application data, and system logs. These records often remain stored even after users believe they have been removed. Investigators also introduced text message conversations connected to the timeline. These messages included references to routines and daily patterns. Timing details became especially important because they helped investigators understand how events may have been planned or monitored. As these messages were reviewed, explanations began to change slightly. The suspect suggested that some information may have been misunderstood. At another point, he suggested that device usage may not always reflect who was operating the phone. Investigators carefully addressed each explanation using technical confirmation. This step-by-step approach helps maintain structure during interviews. Rather than presenting all evidence at once, investigators introduce information gradually. This method allows them to observe how responses evolve. Digital evidence is often difficult to dispute because it exists in multiple locations at the same time. Data may be stored directly on a device, but it can also exist in cloud backups. In addition, mobile service providers maintain activity logs on secure servers. Because of this layered storage system, investigators are able to cross-check information across several sources. This multi-source verification strengthens the reliability of digital timelines. When timestamps match across device storage, cloud systems, and provider records, the data becomes highly consistent. During this stage of the interview, the suspect's earlier confidence continued to weaken, and that question would soon become the most important part of the investigation. Following the money, motive begins to surface. As the investigation progressed, detectives shifted focus from the sequence of events to financial patterns. They recognized that understanding financial behavior often provides crucial insight into motive. In cases where family members are involved, money-related pressures can sometimes explain unusual or suspicious behavior. For investigators, establishing whether financial stress existed was an essential step in connecting motive to the actions being examined. Detectives began by reviewing bank accounts, credit activity, and recent transactions linked to the son-in-law. Several indicators of financial strain quickly became apparent. Records showed ongoing debt accumulation, including overdue bills and loans with growing balances. Some payments had been missed entirely, causing interest to compound, and creditors to send repeated notifications. Investigators also noted unusually large recent withdrawals from personal accounts. While such transactions were not illegal on their own, they suggested that resources were being redirected or needed urgently. Financial desperation is a common factor in criminal investigations. Experts studying crime patterns have often observed that people under significant monetary pressure may make decisions they would not otherwise consider. It does not automatically indicate guilt, but it helps law enforcement understand potential motives and behavioral triggers. In this investigation, the timing and scale of the son-in-law's financial activity became an important focus. The inquiry expanded to include the structures of Nancy Guthrie's estate. Investigators examined her assets, her savings, and how her wealth would be distributed after her absence or passing. Documents revealed that significant financial benefits could flow to certain family members. While legal distribution processes take time, potential inheritance pathways were noted. These financial pathways could have provided a tangible incentive for someone with pressing money concerns. Investigators also considered broader legal changes that might affect expectations. Changes in estate laws or inheritance regulations can alter when and how money is accessible. If someone believed that a shift in legal rules would delay or limit access to funds, it might increase the urgency of attempting to control or obtain those resources. These factors became part of the motive analysis. During the ongoing interrogation, investigators introduced questions about financial matters in a measured way. Their approach was not accusatory, but aimed to gather factual details. They asked about recent spending habits, debt responsibilities, and awareness of estate structures. Each answer was compared to documented evidence, and discrepancies were noted. The investigators carefully observed psychological reactions, paying attention to hesitation, tone changes, and body language. As discussions continued, subtle signs of pressure became evident. The suspect's composure began to waver slightly, and confidence in previous explanations decreased. Investigators systematically examined connections between financial stress and the timeline of Nancy's disappearance. They cross-referenced bank withdrawals, large purchases, and patterns of communication with the evening events under review. By this point, the evidence was no longer pointing to coincidence, but agents still needed one final piece to understand how the plan was carried out. The breaking point and the questions that remain. After several hours in a controlled interrogation room, the atmosphere began to shift. The son-in-law, who had started the morning appearing composed and confident, now showed clear signs of fatigue. Long questioning sessions are designed to be methodical and exhaustive, and the effects on suspects can be significant. Prolonged focus, repetition, and exposure to evidence often lead to psychological fatigue. In this state, individuals may experience reduced resistance to probing questions and increased emotional responses. Even the most rehearsed statements can begin to unravel under careful, persistent examination. Investigators continued the questioning with precision. Each question was deliberate, aimed at verifying or challenging previously given statements. As the session extended into multiple hours, subtle cracks in the suspect's story began to appear. Partial admissions started to emerge. These were small acknowledgments that did not confirm guilt, but suggested awareness of inconsistencies in prior accounts. Investigators observed closely, noting hesitation, change in tone, body posture, and eye movements. The combination of observation and evidence application is a critical part of interrogation strategy, allowing professionals to connect behavioral cues to factual discrepancies. The investigators systematically confronted contradictions using a multi-layered approach. Digital data, financial records, and witness accounts were used in conjunction to highlight inconsistencies. Phone records provided precise timelines of communications, while digital messages revealed patterns of interaction and coordination. Financial documents displayed recent transactions, withdrawals, and debt pressures that could influence behavior. Witness accounts contributed first-hand perspectives on the suspect's conduct and routines, adding further context to the investigation. The integration of these three forms of evidence allowed agents to present a coherent challenge to the suspect's version of events, applying pressure without direct accusation. During this stage, mentions of potential accomplice discussions surfaced. Investigators examined whether other individuals might have been aware of or involved in irregular activities surrounding the disappearance. While no formal charges were introduced at this moment, considering accomplices is a standard investigative procedure in complex cases. It ensures that the network of influence, communication, or coordination is fully evaluated, leaving no aspect unexplored. This line of questioning added additional pressure and complexity to the session, testing the suspect's consistency under compounded scrutiny. Perhaps the most unsettling detail observed during the interrogation was the apparent lack of consistent concern expressed for Nancy Guthrie's safety. Investigators noted minimal displays of empathy or urgency regarding her well-being. Even with partial admissions or strong circumstantial evidence, investigators cannot close a case until they establish the whereabouts of the missing individual and ensure safety or recovery. Persistence over weeks, months, or even years is often necessary. Even after hours of questioning and mounting evidence, one critical question remained unanswered. Where was Nancy Guthrie, and was there still time to find her? If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.